All right. So it looks like we have one person watching. We'll just give it a few minutes for a few more people to pop in. Sorry for the blowout over there, but I needed some light, and this is how I've set this up. So unfortunately, we got some light in the background. That's going to be a little bit annoying, but oh well. There goes Thor and Loki. They are announcing the live stream so that the neighbors can hop on as well. I think they're doing work next door, so I think that's actually what they're barking at. Is there's drilling and hammering that starts going on from the morning till like 6 in the afternoon or in the evening, and it's nonstop all day. And then Loki especially goes crazy barking at whoever it is that's doing that. Oh, we got someone else popped on here. So I'm going to get this started in just about 3 more minutes. I'm assuming you guys can hear me. Hopefully. I had a little bit of a technical difficulty early on, but that happens every single time that I try to go live. Something always happens. Even when we go live with the great old ones, there's always some kind of technical issue. It's unavoidable, unavoidable for live streams. And watching a few other content creators go live, it seems like it's a universal issue. I don't know why, but it's just the nature of the game, I guess. Oh, you can't hear me. Okay, let's see. Oh shoot! Thank God, you had me going for a second, big stupid grin. I thought for real you can hear me. Usually it's audio that's the problem, almost always. So that's hilarious. You got me good. You got me good. All right, so today I'm gonna just be talking about the state of role playing games in general, and then I'm gonna kind of narrow down to a few of the games that I'm familiar with, that I've played or read through, and some of the things I like, some of the things that I wish would be a little bit different, and things that you can take away and maybe add to your own role playing games as well from a lot of these games. A lot of them have some great ideas. I think about every single one has something cool or interesting that's different from the others that would make it either a great game if you combined all of these things together, or a mishmash of just a bunch of great ideas. So, however you want to put these together, or if you want to incorporate some of these into your role playing game, it may be a good idea to incorporate like one or two, but some of them are really, really cool. So, I think I'm going to start with discussing what started this whole situation. 2 years ago, Wizards of the Coast decided to put out a document that basically ended the Open Gaming License. And for those of you who are not familiar with what the Open Gaming License is, basically it's what allows third party creators to make adventures and supplements for a role playing game without fear of being sued for copyright infringement. So the Open Gaming License gives these creators rights to certain assets or certain intellectual property from the game, rule sets and things like that, so that they can freely make these supplements and adventures. In the end, it helps the industry as a whole because one company can't put out enough content to keep everybody happy, or at least high quality content in such a fast pace. So all these third party creators, it's like a meeting of the masterminds where some people have some great ideas that maybe the main publisher of these games would not have been able to come up with. So you have all these great ideas coming together, great supplements from third parties coming out, brings in new players, brings in more players, which helps the hobby as a whole. But unfortunately, by Wizards of the Coast pulling this maneuver, it scared the entire industry because they are the biggest player in the industry. People kind of scrambled because now there's certain games that came out that borrowed some mechanics from Wizards of the Coast, or some of them didn't even do that. They just, out of respect for the biggest game in the industry, would just put in that they were using the open gaming license for their game, even though they didn't necessarily need to, because usually mechanics are not something you can copyright. So a lot of these companies panic because now you you're going to have to end your product or lose a ton of money because you're going to have to pay all these royalties to Wizards of the Coast. But worse is the smaller creators. The smaller creators, yes, Wizards of the Coast are the makers of Dungeons and Dragons. Thank you very much, Headless Hammerhead. I should have clarified that. What made it worse is that content creators, such as YouTubers and people who make content online, like they have certain websites that add content to the game, they were also at risk of being sued because this open gaming license no longer allowed them to create content. Some of them who had run Kickstarters and all that, they're small creators. Wizards of the Coast would require a huge percentage of their profits to go to them. Plus, they would require for everything that you make for their game to be basically forfeited to them. So they would own your intellectual property. You could invent an entire world, entire characters, and by removing the open gaming license and putting out this new license, now they are the owners of your intellectual property. And if in a few months they want to put out a supplement with all of your stuff in it, they could do that and not pay you a penny. So this caused a major uproar in the industry, and people were scrambling. And so what a lot of people did was they said, well, you know what? We can't count on Wizards of the Coast anymore and Dungeons and Dragons to be I forget what the word I'm looking for. But anyways, to be the ones who are leading the charge in this hobby, we're going to have to do our own thing. So a lot of these people decided to start making their own games, and a lot of games that were already out or existed started to become more popular because a lot of players were very upset at this move from Wizards of the Coast. So a bunch of games that maybe were kind of lost in the mass of unknown role-playing games all of a sudden started gaining a lot of popularity and now have become some of the bigger games in the industry. Of course, Dungeons and Dragons is still the biggest by far, but a lot of these games are gaining a lot of steam and doing very well for themselves. Some brand new right off the ground because of this OGL, and some that were around from before. So we're going to talk about some of these and go over some of the cool things that they've come up with. And I think in the end, what Wizards of the Coast did was really bad. It basically lost the trust of a lot of people. So I don't think anyone is comfortable putting out stuff for Dungeons and Dragons anymore. Everyone's kind of walking on their tiptoes when they're making stuff. Even me, I'm putting out a supplement for 5th edition, and I almost had to end that when the OGL came out. I was already working on this thing, and I almost had to just scrap the entire thing because I thought, well, I'm not going to just have them own my stuff and have to pay a bunch of money and then really not do all this work and not really make any money from it. So I ended. There were a couple other projects actually that I had going on that I completely ended. My channel, I was putting out fairly regular content. I didn't put out content for 6 months because this really messed me up. Like, it really depressed me. And I think a lot of YouTubers and content creators ended their YouTube careers completely because they just decided not to cover D&D. So even though, all these bad things came out of it, I think we can still see light at the end of the tunnel because the good things that came out of it are now people are more familiar with a bunch of these games, and these games are gaining more popularity, and a lot of these companies are now flourishing. So in the end, maybe this OGL situation, was, I guess, a poop-covered nugget of gold. So it came with poop, we cleaned it up, and now what we have is gold because we have a bunch of cool things. And some people that were maybe hesitant to put out their own stuff now felt empowered because they said, you know what, if they're going to try and do this, I'm just going to do my own thing. So I think overall it ended up being a good thing. All right, so let's go ahead and start. Hopefully you guys can see the PowerPoint. Let's see. And no. Great. Yeah, I'm assuming you can still hear me. Well, that is the first technical issue, or the second technical issue here. Let me see if I can quickly get that set up, because I'd like to show you like the images of these. All right. Can you hear me now? This is I'm kind of screwing this up pretty bad. Let me know if you can hear me. All right, perfect. Okay, so I just ranted about 13th Age for a little bit, and you guys couldn't hear me. Always the technical issues on live streams. I'll probably get better at this at some point. Sorry, guys. All right, we'll start the slideshow again and start that over. So I know that the screen is still off center. Sorry, I'm just not gonna mess around with it anymore. But 13th Age, it's a really similar game to Dungeons and Dragons. There are some really cool things about it. The second edition is about to come out. The Kickstarter did over $1 million, and they're still doing like they're on Magma edition right now, so it's like almost done, and the actual final version will be out very soon. The 13th Age game is interesting. They have some really cool ideas, specifically the escalation die. So what this is there's a six-sided die that you put at the center of the table when you start a combat. And that die, the amount that it shows on the top of the die is a representation of a bonus that each player is going to get for all their abilities and attacks and things like that. So every round, that die escalates. So you change it to a number 2 on the second round, then flip it to a 3rd on the 3rd round until you hit the maximum of 6. So by the 6th round of combat, all your player characters are going to get a +6 to hit, +6 to spell attacks and skills and things like that. It makes for an interesting dynamic because most player characters are going to use a bunch of their abilities early in a combat. They may expend everything they have on the first 2 rounds of combat and not have anything left, any cool special abilities. But because of the escalation die, you're still going to be efficient because every round that goes by, you're getting stronger and stronger. So it adds a very interesting element to combats. So I really like that idea. But one thing that I wish was a little bit different is there's not a whole lot of customization with 13th Age. Character creation feels a little bland. And this can change because the game is not in its final form yet. But there are abilities to pick from every time you level up or when you create a character. But they seem very, I wouldn't say minor, but they're very limited. So you can make one type of rogue or another type of rogue, but that's pretty much it. You're kind of shoehorned into 2 specific archetypes, and the other abilities that you get as you level up kind of support those archetypes, and it's really hard to kind of mix and match and make something different that would be a 3rd archetype. You're kind of boxed in. Now, that is freed up a little bit through multi-classing, but not by much. I mean, in these types of games, multi-classing can create some interesting builds, but I really wish that I didn't have to multi-class to make something that's a lot different from the rogue next to me. So that's one thing that's unfortunate. But overall, 13th Age is a decent game. There's a lot of love for this game, and I think it's going to do really well. I mean, the Kickstarter did really well, so I think a lot of people are going to enjoy playing 13th Age as an alternative to Dungeons and Dragons. It fits the same niche, high-powered, high fantasy. You do get very powerful. You only go to level 10, though, but you do get very powerful by level 10. So, pretty interesting game. Not my favorite, but some good ideas there. Next up, we're going to be talking about Alien, the role-playing game. Nate from the Great Old Ones has been running several games for this. It is such a cool game for what it is. If you like sci-fi horror, specifically in the world of Alien from the movies, then you will love this game. I think for what it is perfect. The mechanics that they've created for this game are very simple. They allow for a ton of role-playing when you're not dealing with high-stress situations like combat or running away or conflict. So it very light on the rules when it comes to social interactions, which I really like because it opens up for a lot of role-playing. I really, really like that. And then the stress system and the combat system are perfect for what it is. I mean, it's very brutal and deadly, and that's how it should be. The game is very scary, and it definitely brings a sense of horror and dread and isolation, which is exactly what you want from a game about the Alien franchise. And you would think that it would get boring where it's just Alien, how many different things can you do? But no, a lot of the scenarios are very unique, and they find really cool and unique ways to make them interesting and keep things kind of lively and different than the previous adventure. So I think that the Alien role playing game has a very bright future. In fact, they're making a second edition, and the Kickstarter, I think, is already launched or is launching soon. So that is probably going to be even better, I would assume, because they're learning from their mistakes on this one, which there aren't many. I think the biggest mistakes on the Alien RPG in the first edition are just some of the adventures or scenarios maybe miss the mark a little bit, but a lot of other ones are really, really good. So they can be a bit hit or miss, but other than that, the mechanics themselves, the game itself, I think is really good. I don't know that it needed a second edition yet, but they're making one. Next is the Call of Cthulhu, the role-playing game. H.P. Lovecraft, of course, a lot of people know Lovecraft. They love Lovecraftian stuff. And if you like horror gaming and don't want to play in space and fight aliens, then Call of Cthulhu might be the game for you. Call of Cthulhu has been around for a very long time. It is actually the second most popular role-playing game in the world. In certain countries, it is the most popular role-playing game, but more popular than Dungeons and Dragons. So Call of Cthulhu is a big player in the industry. It is a skill-based game, so there's very little in terms of advancement. You advance very slowly. There's not any kind of levels in the game. You're just increasing your skills, and there are a ton of skills. So unlike Alien RPG that keeps things fairly simple, this one is a little more complex because of the large amount of skills that you would need to invest in, and you need to figure out how to spread them out for your particular investigator. What's cool about Call of Cthulhu is it's very versatile in terms of setting. You can actually make a campaign for Call of Cthulhu for World War II, or that takes place in World War II. You can make a campaign for Call of Cthulhu that takes place in medieval times. And a lot of those have been actually expanded into their own kind of books. There's Pulp Cthulhu, there's Cthulhu Dark Ages. There's a bunch of different versions of Call of Cthulhu, but in the end, they all use the main core system of Call of Cthulhu, which is a skill-based system. There is a huge fan base for skill-based games. For a game like this, I think it works, but skill-based games are not my favorite. I think it's when you have a whole bunch of skills like that, sometimes it causes confusion, and if you have a dungeon master or a game master, in this case, they're called the Keeper. When you have a Keeper who is a stickler for minutia, it can really bog down the gameplay because there's a certain skill name on your page. A lot of Keepers think that all of a sudden you have to roll for that skill every single time a situation presents itself. And I know that was vague, so let me give you an example. There is a skill called Drive. So it's basically for how good you drive, right? So it's expected that most of your characters know how to drive. But if you have the drive skill, it's really when you're in a stressful situation, how you can handle a vehicle if you're in a chase scene or veered off or your tire popped or whatever. Something major happens, something exciting happens. But there are some Keepers that will have you get in a car and they'll have you roll your drive skill to see if you can even get it started and get it moving. And that's, I think, not the intention of the game, and I think that bogs it down quite a bit. It makes it for a very miserable experience, in my opinion, when you have a Keeper that's doing that kind of stuff. You know, it's unfortunate that there's not more guidance for that, or at least that people aren't as aware of the fact that you don't need to roll for every minor thing. But skill-based games, unfortunately, does attract a little bit of that, and I think that's one of the problems I have with it. Additionally, I think skill-based games, because they're just percentage-based, there's just something about it that feels a little toned down. And again, in a game like Call of Cthulhu, that's okay because you're playing regular humans, right? They don't have any special abilities for the most part, unless you're playing Pulp Cthulhu. But you're a regular human, so that's all you have is what you've learned in life. But unfortunately, it's something that's not necessarily my favorite thing for role-playing games. I prefer something with a little bit more meat. But again, I still like Call of Cthulhu. I play it all the time. I actually put this before the next one, but because Delta Green should have been next. But Dungeons and Dragons, everyone kind of knows Dungeons and Dragons if you're familiar with role-playing games. It is the top role-playing game in the world, and it is high fantasy. And now Dungeons and Dragons has become more of kind of a super heroic fantasy game. So your characters are very, very powerful by the end of a campaign. They're flying around, shooting fireballs, destroying entire cities by themselves. And the new version, the 2024 version of the game, has made that even worse. You're basically almost super powered hero at level 2. So they're going in a direction that I'm not necessarily happy with, and that's partially why I started looking into other games. I was already starting to feel that way before Dungeons and Dragons, or before Wizards of the Coast decided to do the whole OGL situation. And the OGL just kind of nudged me forward into saying, okay, yeah, definitely, I think I need to move on to a different game. I still play Dungeons and Dragons with one group every week, but it may be my last campaign. The new edition, they improved some things that were buggy in the first edition, or in the 5th edition, but a lot of it is just not to my taste anymore. Even some of the art in the book is now so different from what I imagined Dungeons and Dragons to be. And to me, that's important because the art is what immerses you in a game and in a game world. And if the art doesn't invoke the same type of images that you pictured in your head when you played the game, then maybe it's time for a different game. And that's okay. I mean, there's plenty of other games out there that do invoke those images. And to give you an example, I mean, back in the day, I felt like Dungeons and Dragons would play well to run a like Conan type of campaign, or even Excalibur, let's say. In this case, Dungeons and Dragons now is far different from that. I can't picture that when I look through the art of the new book. It's people always smiling and flying around, shooting everything, and having like this superhero. I mean, it looks more like the Avengers than Excalibur. So that is why I'm kind of moving away from Dungeons and Dragons. Then we have Daggerheart. Daggerheart is the game that was created because of the OGL by the people from Critical Role. I don't know too much. I haven't played it or run the playtest. I haven't read through much of it. I've just read reviews and watched some YouTube reviews on it. And it's not my cup of tea, but I could see some people would like it. The premise is you roll 2 12-sided die and 2 12-sided dice. And one is called Fear and one is called Focus or something like that. But basically one is positive, one is negative. So if you roll higher with the one that's positive, then and you succeed on your roll, then something good happens. If you succeed on your roll, but the bad die is higher, then you succeed, but there's kind of like a little drawback to it. Same if you fail. If you fail your roll, whatever it is you're attempting to do, if you roll the positive dice or die, then even though you failed, something good happened. This is similar to what the Marvel Multiverse game does, and we'll get to that later when we get to that game. But, hey, what's up, JP? I'm talking about different role-playing games. So, if you roll poorly, let's say, but roll high on the good dice, then something good happens. And what I don't like about this is that it puts a lot of pressure on the game master, because every single time that someone rolls dice, you have to come up with ideas for failure with a positive, failure with a negative, success with a positive, success with a negative. So you have to constantly have 4 different outcomes in your head for every time. I will definitely say hi to Thor and Loki for you, JP. Thank you so much. So I think that Daggerheart may be good for the people that want to be able to do that and want to be forced into narrating every single roll. But what I think is going to end up happening is a lot of people that play this game, they're gonna maybe do it for a few sessions, and then eventually they're just gonna ignore the that element of it and just roll 2d12 and then see if they succeed or fail. And they're just gonna, once in a blue moon, come up with an idea as to why you failed, but something good happened or whatever. But it's not gonna happen every time. It's just it's too bulky for each roll to have to do that. But otherwise, I think it's very similar to Dungeons and Dragons 2024. Same thing, like very high powered, magical superheroes. So again, it's probably not the game for me, but it might be the game for you, especially if you're a Critical Role fan. Next up is Delta Green, one of my favorite games. This is another horror game, and Delta Green is basically modern times Call of Cthulhu. It is Lovecraftian, but also you can do like aliens and things like that. But it's basically conspiracy, government conspiracy, and a lot of horrific things that happen. For some reason, this game really hits me as one of the most successful, I guess, presentations of horror in a game. It does it so well. When every scenario that's official from the company that makes Delta Green, Arc Dream Publishing, every single adventure I've read through, which I've read through most of them, is awesome. It's like I could picture it in a movie and it'd be an awesome horror movie. So this game, more so than Call of Cthulhu, more so than Alien, the role-playing game, this game really embodies that horror for me. And I think it's because of a couple of mechanics that they changed from Call of Cthulhu. In its core, it does copy a few mechanics from the Call of Cthulhu game, like skills, but they add a few more things, like bonds and motivations. And I think that really adds to the feeling of despair and horror and your character's inevitable decline into madness. Bonds, basically, when you make your character, you're writing down what motivates them, what keeps them sane. It could be your dogs, it could be your wife or your family, your children, it could be your coworkers. But as you encounter more horrific things, those bonds start to deteriorate, and eventually you'll lose a bond, which means you kind of just go blank with those people. You separate yourself, you grow distant from those bonds, whether it's people or it could even be something. It doesn't have to be a person, right? Your bond could be your favorite sports car or something. And eventually you just lose interest in it because things are so horrible that you start to realize, like, what's the point, right? It's inevitable. It's very, very grim, but it's awesome. It really plays to the horror of what's happening, and the fact that you have to keep it all inside as a character and can't share it with the rest of the world because you're supposed to. Part of the game is trying to keep everything secret and from the world finding out, because it would just drive everyone mad. It's such a cool game. I highly recommend this game above pretty much every other game in this list. It is one of my favorite games of all time. Next is Dragonbane. So Dragonbane is, on the surface, it looks like a D&D clone, but it's not. It's kind of got some old school sentiment. It's a fun little game that's pretty simple on its surface, but has some tactical depth. Dragonbane is a game it's a Nordic game, I think Finland, maybe. But it was written like in the 80s, and this is like a new edition redone for new audiences and all that, and with new mechanics and new rules and all that. It's super cool. So you make a character, but it's super deadly. You can get killed in one hit pretty much. But it's also meant to be like laughs. Like you're put in situations that are so preposterous, and you're killed in such horrible ways, or such horrible things can happen, that you can't do anything but laugh. But at the same time, your character can also be pretty much a badass. So it's kind of funny, the dynamic there. Dragonbane is something that gave me inspiration for my game, because it uses a one-action economy. It basically allows you to do one thing each turn, and that's it. And you would think that would limit you, but it actually creates such a interesting tactical element when you're playing and when you're in combat, because that one action is so valuable that you have to make the most of it. It's really cool. Also, the enemies are really fun to run, because most of the boss enemies have a chart of things that they do, abilities that they have, and you roll like a D8 or a D6, and it'll it'll tell you what they do that round, which is super cool. So like if you're fighting a dragon, it may use its dragon breath if you roll a 6 on its d6. So if you don't roll a 6, then you may have gotten lucky and may have a chance against it. But otherwise, this thing's going to eat you. So really, really cool game. And you see the Darkwing Duck looking guy on the right. Oh, no, you can't see it because this image is all off to the side. But they have like a duck race, which is hilarious. Not my cup of tea for a serious heroic role-playing game, but this game is not meant to be serious. Dragonbane, deadly as it is meant to be like funny and fun. In fact, they call it mirth and mayhem roleplay. So that alone tells you exactly what mood you want to be in when you play this game. I really like it. It's one of my favorite games that have come out in the last couple of years, and I can't wait to play it with some of my groups. Next is going to be Draw Steel, otherwise known as the MCDM RPG. I know very little about it. I just wanted to mention it briefly because it was one of the best-selling Kickstarters for role-playing games of all time. It was like $4.5 million on Kickstarter is what it raised. And what's interesting about this game is that it raised all that money and no one even knew anything about the game mechanics. They raised that much money on a premise and a promise. And the promise was that this thing was going to be tactical, heroic, and cinematic. And I don't know how you could do tactical and cinematic, but they are saying they're going to do it. And by all means, if they do, that sounds interesting. But from what they've put out so far, which, not to throw dirt at the MCDM people, but all these other companies have come up with games and put them out fairly quickly. They've been at this for over a year, and they still haven't have set mechanics for the game. They're constantly changing stuff, and not a little bit, completely, just completely getting rid of all their ideas and then starting from scratch and then trying again. It's kind of strange, and it's become kind of a meme online. I think they finally settled on a core mechanic, which I think you roll 2d10, and then you consult a chart to see how much damage you do based on the weapon. So each weapon's going to have its own chart. It sounds really complicated. If that's what they go with, I don't know how that's going to play at a table, because every time you roll to attack, you have to consult a table. That gets old very quickly. I can assure you of that. I've tried that before. They say, oh no, people will eventually memorize what's on the table. Maybe. I don't know. I just don't think that's going to work. But we'll see, I guess. We'll see. Another thing that I didn't necessarily care for is the kits. They have these loadout kits. So if you want to buy a certain type of weapon or armor, from my understanding, you can't. You have a kit that you have to get. So you get it as a package. So you'll get a cloak and a dagger or something. Or you get a full plate armor and a sword. And that is the adventurer kit. And the cloak and dagger is the rogue kit. And then if you have a skulking kit, then you'll have a short sword and leather armor or something. It's really bizarre. And I don't know. I guess they're trying to keep it simple with equipment, but I don't know that I like it. It feels kind of like a video game to me. And I know I'm being kind of negative on this one, but unfortunately I haven't had much exposure to it because they keep changing things, and then they're charging people $8 a month just to watch videos on how they're progressing on it after people already, bought the book on Kickstarter for, $70 to $500 for the premium book. Then they have to join a Patreon for the last year and a half, paying $8 a month. It seems, I don't know. I don't want to say it's a cash grab, but it's a cash grab. All right, so next up is Lancer. Lancer is a mech-based RPG. So basically, you are a pilot of a mech, which, if you don't know what a mech is, it's a big robot that is piloted by a human. So you are a pilot of a mech, and it's kind of in the future. The world has now expanded because, humans are traveling to other planets and all that. And it seems really, really cool. There are very simple mechanics for social interaction, kind of like Alien RPG. I love that because it creates a lot of opportunity for role play. And as far as combat, there's a tremendous amount of tactical complexity, but it's not overly complicated, if that makes any sense. Like, there are plenty of tactical options for each character, for each mech, but it's not bogged down with overcomplicated rules. So it runs fast and it runs smooth, and it creates a really satisfying combat experience and a really satisfying social experience. So I think Lancer is also one of my favorite games on this whole list, probably just under Delta Green. I really, really like what I'm seeing with Lancer. Lancer is one of the ones that grew the quickest. It was out before the OGL situation, and then Dark Horse Comics kind of joined in with the makers of the game and started helping with some artwork, because Dark Horse is a comic book company. And they started making some artwork for it. They put out an actual physical book, and the game really grew very quickly after the OGL situation that I talked about earlier in the video. So I think this game really benefited from Wizards of the Coast pulling that maneuver with the OGL. And I'm glad, because I would have never heard of Lancer otherwise. And Lancer is a really awesome game, especially if you want something different than fantasy, than heroic fantasy, maybe playing with robots and mechs. I think that's something that's really cool, because you can customize your mechs, add guns, add different weapons, add different modules. Really, really cool. Next up is Left for the Vultures RPG. This one's not out yet. This is my role-playing game that I'm working on. I took a lot of information and ideas from a lot of the games that I'm talking about on this list, and I'm really happy with it. It's a more dark and gritty fantasy role-playing. It's not as super heroic. It's more grounded, and it's not quite like what the new old school D&D games are, which, it's like instant death, that type of stuff. That's not what I'm going for, but I am going for very dark and gritty. And I really like the idea of incorporating some Shakespearean elements into a lot of the adventures, so I'm playing around with some of that. I can't wait till you guys see this. The beta test is going to be out probably next month, so that's why I'm mentioning it here, because I kind of want you guys to get a little familiar with it and maybe get an idea of what this might be before I put it out. Next up is the multiverse role-playing game from Marvel. So Marvel licensed out their IP, and they put out a role-playing game, which they've had a few throughout the years. This one, it's interesting. There are some elements that I like. It's rules light for social interaction. Even combat is fairly rules light. So the game does move pretty quickly. Unfortunately, I think it's failed in a lot of its mechanics. They put out a playtest, and we bought into the playtest. Our group playtested some of the things, and I feel like they didn't take all the feedback from the playtest, or maybe the people that were doing the playtest were more concerned with with their favorite characters and what they should be able to do, and gave feedback that actually ended up hurting the final version of the game. Unfortunately, I think this game needs a second edition already. It has potential. It has some elements that are interesting, like it's good on role playing. It's good with a few of the mechanical elements of it, but I think it is extremely out of balance. Not in a good way either, because some games can be out of balance and be fine, but I don't think that this one works in that way, unfortunately. The book is really nice, though. The art is beautiful. The colors are bright, and Loki is barking. But, I can't say that I would play this again, unfortunately. We played a full campaign through it. We had a great time, but there's a lot of problems with this game. And especially if you're in a group where people are power gamers, this game can be broken very easily, and broken to the point where it's extremely unfun. I'll just tell you that. All right, next up, and sorry, this is really going to be in your face, Morkborg. Morkborg, sorry, is how you pronounce it. Morkborg is a, I think, Swedish game, and it is crazy. The whole book is like some death metal looking thing where, here, let me actually get out of here and show you the actual physical book, because it's crazy. It's like if you bought a death metal album. The entire interior is like that. Like, there's no there is no page that's just like text that's interesting. Like, it is literally large, crazy images and imagery, death metal imagery. So it certainly has its style. It certainly does. The game itself is super deadly. It's if you want to have some fun playing a game where people just die in the most horrific ways, play Morkberg. But I don't know. It's I guess beer and pretzels type of game where you'll maybe just get together with some friends. You'll play for a few hours and everyone dies at the end or whatever. You don't all have to die at the end, but more than likely that's what's going to happen. And then you just laugh about it and tell stories later about it. There's definitely a place for that, and that's cool. I mean, I would play it for sure, but it's not something that I'm going to play like on a regular basis. Now, Merkborg, it has been. Oh, it's Merkborg is how it's pronounced. Sorry. Merkborg is getting extremely popular. It won Best Layout from one of the award ceremonies or whatever that they do for games. I don't know that I would have given it the award for Best Layout, even though it's very stylish. It's very hard to read and follow because of the way it is laid out. It is hardcore, Logan. Very, very hardcore. Seems fun, and it's grown in popularity. There's all sorts of different versions of it. There's like Pirateburg, which is like pirates, and then there's I forget what the other one's called, but it's like it's kind of like cyberpunk. I think Cyborg is what it's called, Cyborg. So there's some cool like little offshoots of it that people have done on their own, and the company has totally embraced. And so people are having fun with it. So it's cool. It's got like a little mini community that's really embracing the craziness of this game. It's just absolute insanity. There's something about it that's funny and fun. But I don't know that anyone will make it like the regular playgroup game. Next up is Pathfinder 2nd Edition. So Pathfinder is probably the most similar to Dungeons & Dragons. Pathfinder 2nd Edition... the first edition, spawned out of 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons, but the 2nd edition of Pathfinder, it's its own thing. Even though thematically it's almost identical to D&D, in terms of the mechanics, it's very, very different. Where D&D kind of focuses on your individual character to be the biggest powerhouse it can be and extremely self-sufficient. In D&D, most characters can attack, do damage, heal, cast some kind of spell. Almost every character has some spell-like ability. Pathfinder doesn't work that way. Pathfinder kind of encourages team play. And so if you're playing this game and you're doing some kind of dungeon crawl, if your team doesn't have its tactics and their character rolls, on point, you will all die for sure. It is a very difficult game, and it's far more hardcore than D&D. In terms of that, D&D, it's very hard for your characters to die. In Pathfinder, it is definitely not difficult for your characters to die. If you make a wrong move, it can literally get your party killed. Now, Pathfinder is known to be a complex game. The mechanics are very, very crunchy. It's probably the crunchiest game on this list. There's a lot of things to keep track of, both in-game and in character creation. A lot of options, so there's a breadth of abilities and things that you can customize your character with. So as in complete opposition to 13th Age, where you are kind of boxed into very specific character archetypes that are very limited, Pathfinder, you can literally be any character class and customize that particular character and make it almost unrecognizable as that character class. It's really cool. There's so many different options. But because it's so complex, this is a game that you absolutely need to have a virtual tabletop to play with. Virtual tabletop is like when you play online, the system calculates a lot of the stuff for you and keeps track of a lot of the stuff for you. Because keeping track of everything that's going on in this game is so hard. I don't know. I wouldn't play this at a table without a virtual tabletop. Let's just put it that way. It's very, very complicated, keeping track of several things every single round. It's really bogged down sometimes. The other thing is also that it's a very balanced game. So if you like that, then this game is for you. If you want fighters and wizards to have very similar power levels, then this is the game for you. But because of that balance, a lot of people feel that this game maybe went too far with that. And there's not a lot of dynamic differences in terms of power levels. And sometimes it's fun to have that. Sometimes it's fun to be the guy that comes in when your party's about to die and just shoot that fireball and save the day. Or, whatever it is that your character does and save the day. But you can do that in Pathfinder, but it's not as common because every character is almost equally powerful. And sometimes that makes it a little bit, more sterilized in a way. Next up is Shadowdark. So Shadowdark is probably the number one game to have benefited from the whole OGL situation. Shadowdark is a very rules-light game, kind of like Merkborg. Not quite as rules-light as Merkborg. It does have some elements of New School, as you can see. Oh no, you can't see that part of the screen because of my technical issues. But Shadowdark uses 20-sided die, just like Dungeons & Dragons. It is very similar to Dungeons & Dragons in terms of the base core character classes. But that's where it all ends. There's not a whole lot of customization. There's a lot of randomization. And that is the name of the game with Shadowdark. Random tables everywhere. This book, I think like half the book is random tables. And here I'll show you. It's cool. I like random tables quite a bit. So once you get to like the halfway point, or a little past the halfway point of the book, where are they? Oh yeah. They're kind of spread out, but there are tables upon tables upon tables. There's potions. Hold on. Yeah. Tables, lots of random tables everywhere. I love it. Here we go. Weapon features, traits, just tables after tables. So it's... Oh, and the book is really small. So, like, if I take the Alien RPG, look how tiny this is. I love it. It's compact and it's really easy to carry, easy to read. The text is really big. There's a lot of cool things about this. And this game swept the Ennies this year. So this game won a ton of awards. And I think it deserved a lot of them. Very cool game. Very interesting. And, it's one of those games that's kind of like Merkborg where it's casual because your characters have a very high probability of dying. So Shadowdark is a roll master. That's something I haven't heard in a while. I don't know. I guess similar. Shadowdark is meant to be like a dungeon crawling game. So not so much meant for roleplay, like going into towns. And you can go into towns and, interact with innkeepers and things like that. But the meat of the game is going into the Shadowdark, which is like where your characters are to find treasure and gold. And the Shadowdark is like the underground, basically, where all the creatures live. And there are torch mechanics that are interesting. Like, you have to keep track of your torches, and once they go out, every creature in this game has dark vision, and not a single player character has dark vision. So once those torches go out, you're in a huge disadvantage against the creatures. So you're very likely to die in this game. It is also, because of it, it's very quick and easy to make characters. You can literally roll up a character in like 2 minutes and have a pretty cool and interesting character because of all the random tables. And leveling up is interesting because it's random. So when you level up, say you're a fighter, right? You don't get to pick your next ability at the next level. You roll randomly to see what you get, which could be a +1 to damaging with your weapon. It could be +1 to your armor class. So the benefit you get whenever you level up is random. You cannot pick it. So you can't plan your character ahead. So there's no such thing as power gamers in Shadowdark. Shadowdark has become so popular. Oh, hey, how's it going, Manson? Long time no speak. Shadowdark has gotten so popular that when you go to conventions, there's a lot of tables for Dungeons & Dragons and a ton of tables for Shadowdark as well. This game is probably the one that is going to be a huge contender moving forward for Dungeons and Dragons. It's not going to overtake it because it's too simple and too random to actually be someone's like regular thing. But there are people that are playing full Shadow Dark campaigns, and that's, they love it. A lot of people really like this game. I personally like the random tables and the simplicity. Next up is Tales from the Valiant. So Tales of the Valiant is Kobold Press is a third-party publisher, and because they're a third-party publisher, most of their products were made for Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. So imagine you're Kobold Press and this OGL thing comes out where now you're being kind of blindsided by the company that makes the game that you make products for, now telling you got to pay royalties to them and that they own all your intellectual property. That had to have been the most nerve-wracking thing for this company. I can't even imagine what they went through. That said, I think they made a huge mistake with Tales of the Valiant. They unfortunately dropped the ball. They had an opportunity because they were one of the biggest third-party publishers for D&D. They're very well respected. Their products are great. I own several of their books. They have monster manuals. They have adventures. I own quite a few of them and have played through a couple of their campaigns. They already had the bona fides to make a game that was new and fresh, and people would have followed it. But instead, they decided to go with Tales of the Valiant, which is basically a clone of 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. It's unfortunate. They didn't just take 5th edition and modify it and make their own version of it, like, say, Shadow Dark or something. They basically made the same game. I mean, there's a few differences. They made some changes, but it's, in reality, if you look at Tales of the Valiant, it looks like a homebrew adjustment of the character classes available for 5th edition. It's such minor changes that it makes you wonder, like, what's the point? What's the point of this? I think what they thought, so Pathfinder 1st edition branched out from Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 because Dungeons & Dragons decided they were going to make 4th edition that was way different, and Pathfinder said, no, people still like 3rd edition, so we're going to keep making our own game that's going to be based off 3rd edition. And they succeeded. I think Tales of the Valiant thought they were repeating history by doing the same thing, and making the same game. It worked for Pathfinder. They made the same game as 3rd edition and then just expanded upon it. Tales of the Valiant didn't need to do that because 5th edition is still around. They didn't come out with a 6th edition that was completely different from 5th. So there was no need for Tales of the Valiant to exist. I hate to say it, but man, it's really unfortunate. Now, that said, the art in Tales of the Valiant invokes a lot more of what I envision when I play a heroic fantasy game like Dungeons & Dragons. So if I were to still play 5th edition, let's say, I would probably play Tales of the Valiant just because of the art. But that's not enough. That's just me, right? So I'm sure there's a couple people that feel like me, but that's not enough to make someone switch from 5th edition to Tales of the Valiant. So there's, again, not much else I need to say about Tales of the Valiant because it's literally the same game as 5th edition with a couple of minor changes. Next up is Vagabond. Vagabond was made by a YouTuber. He's a YouTuber that I don't always agree with, but in fact, I disagree with about 80% of the stuff he says because he tends to get pretty political and stuff, and I don't like when YouTubers do that. But that said, he made an awesome game, and I gotta respect that. The game is called Vagabond. It is kind of a pulp version of fantasy. So it's not high-powered fantasy like Dungeons and Dragons. It's not super gritty like Left for the Vultures, my game, or some of the other gritty ones like Dragonbane. Vagabond is more pulp, so there's some fun stuff, but it's also kind of hardcore. He also has a new magic system compared to D&D. He uses mana, which is not new. Mana's been around for a while, but mana points. and he's got a really cool idea with a lot of elements of the game. When you level up, you get to pick from this pool of abilities every time, so it's very customizable. You can really customize your character. So unlike 13th Age, again, that boxes you in into just two archetypes, the illusion of choice there, this one actually you can mix and match different abilities. Now you are locked into certain groups, so like they have like three different groups of abilities, like warrior abilities, spellcaster abilities, and like skill class abilities. And those are the only three groups. And so if you're playing a bard, you can only pick from the skill class abilities, or a rogue you can only pick from the skill class. But bards, rogues, monks, whatever, and he's got a bunch of classes that he's coming out with. When they level up, they have the same group of abilities they can pick from. So it's a cool way to customize your characters, and you can have a bard with a bunch of roguey abilities and things like that, or you can have a fighter with a bunch of like paladin-like abilities. It's a really cool idea. Not just that, but Vagabond also has very simple monster stat blocks, and I love that. I really, really love that. Let me see if I can share my screen on that and show you one of the stat blocks, because it is Vagabond. Here we go. All right, let me see if you guys can see that. Give it a second to pop up. There's a bit of a delay. So there we go. Okay, so this is a Vagabond monster stat block. If you're familiar with Dungeons and Dragons stat blocks, they're like almost a page in size. Look how quick this thing is. It's like just its action, what it does, that's it. How many hit points, where it is in, like, if it's in a group of enemies, it's the midline type of enemy. It's not a frontliner, right? And that's it. It tells you how to run it with just a couple of words, and then it just has some cool abilities, and you just play like that. It's not overly complicated like in Dungeons and Dragons, where so many abilities are just over the top complicated for no reason, and they end up just doing like 1d4 damage. And so I really like this. And then he took some ideas from Dragonbane, where here it looks like you roll for what you get here, or maybe the ability. Let me see it. Yeah, so you get to roll every round, right? So that's pretty cool. Very, very. I love the idea of having very simple stat blocks for enemies. It's something that's very pleasing for a dungeon master or a game master to, because sometimes when we're running a combat, you have more than one creature in the combat. Let's say you have three different creatures. With this Vagabond system, you can literally have three all very quickly, one next to each other, and be able to refer to them very easily. Whereas in D&D, you're going to be flipping. If you have three creatures, you're going to be flipping pages and reading through, lines and lines of stat block in order to figure out what it is you're going to do with each one of those enemies. So very, very cool. I like Vagabond a lot. Again, I don't always agree with what Terran says and what he does, but hey, you know what? The man knows what he's doing when it comes to designing role-playing games. And then this is the last one that we're going to talk about, and it's called Zweihander. Shoot. Zweihander RPG. So they're doing kind of a second edition. It's called the Reforged edition. That Zweihander is probably the closest to the role-playing game that I'm going to be making, because it is dark and gritty, and it is based on Warhammer role-playing. So Warhammer role-playing is a skill-based game, so Call of Cthulhu, Delta Green, but it takes place in a fantasy setting. So it's one of the few skill-based games that take place in a fantasy setting. I know RuneQuest also does that. RuneQuest, if you're not familiar, I didn't put it in here because I haven't fully read through it. But RuneQuest is made by the same company that makes Call of Cthulhu, and RuneQuest is also a very gritty, skill-based fantasy RPG. Zweihander is very dark. It's cool. So the premise is basically your character experienced their own death, sort of, but somehow they survived. And so that now has sparked something in them that caused them to want to go adventuring and change their life into a life of danger and an adventure. So every character you make, you have to create what happened to them in that moment. So what caused them to almost die? That's a super cool idea. My game has something similar. It's a vengeance related thing, but I didn't steal it from them because I didn't find out about this game until after I started making my game. So it's just coincidence. But I really like the idea. I love the idea that you have to come up with a reason for your character to have gone adventuring, but it has to be specifically that they experienced or they faced their own mortality when that happened. And they suffered a big scar from it. Whether it was a mental scar or a physical scar, you suffered a scar from it. And you can roll on the random tables to determine what that is if you can come up with it yourself. So that's really cool. Zweihander is an interesting game. They have dozens, if not over 100 different careers. So that's kind of like your character class. So they have a career system because it's skill based. You don't like gain abilities when you level, that kind of stuff, but you do get more powerful and you do get more stuff from your career that you chose. But it's not quite as much as like a Dungeons and Dragons type of like leveling. But it's an interesting game. The Reforged edition is just kind of, they made it because of the OGL. The game was already out when the OGL happened, and that caused them to have to rewrite a lot of the stuff. But they took the opportunity to kind of fix some issues that the original game had, and so that's I backed them on Kickstarter, and they're on, I think, the final version of it before the actual release. So it's going to be out very, very soon. And I can't wait. I think it's a really cool game. I can't wait to play it at my table. It's not as light as something like Dragonbane or Merkborg or Shadow Dark, so you can't just roll up a character very quickly. This one is a lot more involved, even though it's a skill-based game. But so it's more intended for like long-term campaign type play than a casual one-night play. But I'm really looking forward to it. There's something about it that really draws me in. Maybe I'm just into the gritty, dark, gritty, grounded fantasy games. I don't know, but there's something I really, really like about it. So now that I've rambled for over an hour, oh wow, some more. Oh, Nate, what's up, man? Oh, the minion rules in fourth. Yeah, the minion rules in fourth edition. So what Nate is talking about, D&D fourth edition had some interesting ideas, and one of the best ideas that they had was the minion rule. So what that was if you had a boss creature, right? Sometimes the whole party ganging up on a boss, it sucks because they don't stand a chance. The boss usually does not stand a chance in a game like D&D, unless you're playing Pathfinder 2, where the boss is by himself against. So what they said is in fourth edition, bosses should have minions. So minions are like creatures that just have one hit point, but they do the same damage and have the same abilities that they would normally have if they were regular creatures. So you can have an ogre and fight a regular ogre, or you can have a minion ogre, and the minion ogre has all the same abilities of an ogre, but they only have one hit point. So the player characters still face the danger of that powerful bash attack from the ogre, but if they do 1 point of damage, they can kill it. So it's dangerous. You have to deal with it, but you can deal with it in one round. So it makes it interesting because instead of focusing all of your firepower on the boss, you have other dangers coming at you that are legitimate dangers. They're not just weak level 1 creatures coming at you. So that's what Nate was talking about in the chat about 4th edition. The thing he liked was the minions. And I think that is a cool rule. I do like the minion rule. What about you guys? So what RuneQuest is goated. RuneQuest is... I started reading the book, and I think it's really cool. Skill-based, I was mentioning earlier, skill-based systems are not something that I necessarily care for in my fantasy role-playing or generally. But it works for some games. Like, it works for Delta Green, it works for Call of Cthulhu, and it works for... Alien's not quite a skill-based game, but, it's light. But Zweihander definitely... I feel like it does work for a game like Zweihander. And RuneQuest, the little I read from it, it looks like it works too. And RuneQuest is deadly, man. RuneQuest is kind of like Zweihander. It's just really brutal. A lot of deadly combat can happen in that game. So that seems pretty fun. I do have it. Nate sent me a copy of RuneQuest, and I read through a bit of it, but I haven't finished reading the whole thing. So the little bit that I read seems pretty interesting. Do any of you have any games that I didn't mention that you like, or that have specific little tidbits that you like or have incorporated into some of your role playing games? I know for me, I'm incorporating quite a bit of this stuff into the game that I'm making. But even in, say, D&D, there are certain elements that I like to incorporate from other games. Pathfinder certainly has some great ideas, and it's very similar to D&D. The death and dying rules of Pathfinder, I think, are something that I really like, and I've incorporated into my campaign that I'm running for Kickstarter. So, Horror at Issues Landing, I created a death and dying mechanic for player characters that is very, very similar to Pathfinder's because I liked it so much. So that's an example of one of the rules I took from one game to add to another game. Heroic Logic. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So, Knave. Knave was created by a YouTuber named Ben Milton. He is like the biggest OSR YouTuber. OSR, for those of you who don't know what that is old school. There's huge arguments online. Old school Renaissance or old school revival, depending on who you talk to. People argue just about the meaning of OSR. It's kind of dumb, but OSR itself is great. In fact, the game that I'm making is very OSR inspired because the old school Renaissance is trying to bring in rules from the old school, which keep the game moving and not necessarily simple, because D&D always has been somewhat complex, but there are elements of danger that are more important. There are some elements that of exploration that are more important in OSR games, like torch management and things like that. So the OSR has made a huge resurgence. Sorry, that's my dog Loki, for those of you who don't know him yet. He tends to bark at everything. The OSR is great because it brings in elements from old school, but not everything from old school, which is cool. And a lot of people, it gained a huge resurgence after the OGL fiasco from Wizards of the Coast. The old school Renaissance has been the fastest growing part of tabletop role playing over the last 2 years. It's growing really, really fast. So I'm really, really into the OSR myself. Close this out real quick. Mothership. Okay, so Mothership. From my understanding, I have not read it. I don't own it. From my understanding, it's kind of a more pulpy version of the Alien role-playing game, but it's a little bit more broad, so it doesn't just incorporate Alien. Yeah, it's sci-fi horror, but more open, so you can incorporate like Event Horizon type stuff or something. It's from my understanding what Mothership is. That's also, I've heard a lot of rumblings about it online, and I saw it at my local bookstore, but I didn't pick it up yet. But I've heard good things. But I think it's so similar to Alien RPG that I wouldn't necessarily play both. I don't know. Maybe. 7C I haven't heard of at all. Is that like a pirate game? Sounds like it would be some kind of seafaring pirate game or something. Which there aren't many pirate games out there, so it'd be interesting if there's one dedicated to that other than Pirate Borg. And Pendragon, huh? Pendragon, I don't know anything about it. Obviously, Pendragon probably refers to Arthurian legend because, made by Chaos. Okay, because King Arthur's last name was Pendragon, right? So Arthur Pendragon. So I'm assuming Pendragon is a more Arthurian type of game, and that really interests me because that is the type of fantasy I prefer. Is Arthurian type of fantasy role playing, and not so much the super powered that D&D has become. I like gritty, and I also like Arthurian swashbuckling adventure game. The 7th. Oh, that's cool. Yeah, so kind of pirate swashbuckling. Kind of like Princess Bride type stuff, maybe, or a little more serious than Princess Bride. 7C, I'll look into it. That sounds interesting, and I'm always down for pirates. Why not? But yeah, so there's a few other games that I've heard of, but I didn't put it on this list because I haven't played them. There's a ton of them actually. There's like a lot of the OSR games, Dungeon Crawl Classics. Um, what's some of the other ones? Oh, there's Blades in the Dark. I heard is very good. So Blades in the Dark, I'm familiar with, but since I haven't even opened the book or read it, I didn't put it on the list. But I know what Blades in the Dark is. Basically, it's Powered by the Apocalypse is like a game engine that a lot of role playing games spawned off of. So Blades in the Dark spawned off of Powered by the Apocalypse, so it uses those mechanics. But Blades in the Dark has a unique mechanic because it is a heist game. Blades in the Dark, you play like characters in a dark city, dark gloomy city where there are ghosts and stuff in the city, but you're running heists. So Blades in the Dark has a mechanic where while you're running your heist, you can do what's called a flashback scene. So you can spend points to then do a flashback as to why you are going to succeed in something. So like a guard catches you hiding in the shadows and you're like, oh no, well, I prepared my uniform beforehand. And the DM's like, well, why? You didn't tell me that before, right? Like in a normal game, you'd be like, you didn't tell me you were preparing the uniform. But in Blades in the Dark, that is how the game is played. You're like, the guard catches you and then you say, oh, I had my uniform on. And then you run a flashback scene as to why you decided to put that uniform on to help you succeed in letting the guard think you're another guard. So Blades in the Dark definitely has some interesting elements. I don't know that I would run these flashback scenes constantly in a session. I think it works well in, sprinkled like salt, just a little bit. But it is an interesting and unique mechanic that I haven't seen in many other games. It's like Earth's First Cousin. Sadly, the second edition, which is out, is oversimplified the mechanics from the first edition. I'm assuming you're still talking about 7th. That's too bad. Simplified mechanics are not always a bad thing. I mean, Pathfinder second edition simplified is a lot more simplified than first edition, and it's still very complex, but it's a lot more approachable because of it. Not saying that that's the case for 7th, but big fan of Forged in the Dark. Yeah, Apocalypse. So, Powered by the Apocalypse, all the games that use that engine, there's a lot of them. I think Savage Worlds uses that and that kind of stuff, but I haven't read any of them, so I'm familiar with what they are and what they do and the things, some of the mechanics, but I'm not talking about them too much because I can't speak from authority because I haven't read through them. Leverage RPG, huh? Oh, Leverage, like the show. I had no idea they had an RPG. So, Heroic Logic said that he saw the flashback scene mechanic on the Leverage RPG. And I know Leverage is like a TV show that's about heists, and I heard it's a very good show. But I didn't know that even had a role-playing game that was based on it. I'm assuming it's based on the show, because it would make sense for that to have flashbacks in like a heist-type game. Does Leverage RPG take place in modern times? Because that would be cool. Then you can play like Ocean's 11 type stuff and the Italian Job and all that in an RPG. I don't think there's a lot of RPGs that do that in modern times. Yeah. But there's a big love for all those games that are based on that engine. So clearly people like it, and clearly if they've made several games that have been successful from it, there's something to it. There's another game that's super simple that, now that you've mentioned simplicity, it came to my mind. It's not so much a role-playing game. I guess I would consider it a board game, but some people call it a role-playing game. It's called Alice is Missing. And you literally it's a very tiny, thin little book, and you play with your phone, basically. And it's a text-based game. So you sit in a room with all the other players. You can't talk, from my understanding. You just play via text. You, text each other information. And it's really grown in popularity. I think people really, really like it. So there's something about it that makes it interesting. And so if any of you have played Alice is Missing, let me know how that is, because I've heard a lot of good things, and I saw it in the game store the other day. And I think that's a game that I would want to try. It sounds more like a party game. Well, I guess not really a party because you can't talk. But maybe a real like group gathered game. I don't know if it would work as well online. But yeah, oh, okay. So the leverage is based on modern times. That's cool. That's cool. I like games that take place in modern times, like Delta Green. Delta Green, I think part of what makes it more not approachable but more relatable. If you make a character for Delta Green, for me, it's more horrific when something happens to them because I can see myself in them more than any other type of game, even Call of Cthulhu, mostly because it takes place in modern times. So I think that really adds to the feel of it, and I feel like a heist game works better like that. So like something like that leverage RPG probably for me would be more appealing than something like Blades in the Dark. I like heist adventures in D&D. I've written a couple. There's actually a heist in my campaign, Horror at Ishizu Landing, but it's actually the first adventure in the campaign. So I do like running heists, but a game based on heist, I think, is served better in something like modern times versus a fantasy RPG where you have swords and magic that makes things a little bit too easy to bypass. Yeah. Any other games you guys think are really cool and enjoyable that have come out in the last few years, or any Kickstarters for games that have caught your eye? Like me, I mentioned Vagabond. That one really interests me. I can't wait to get that game and play it. It looks like it's going to be one of my favorite games. Taryn really did a good job of bringing in all his favorite games, ideas from his favorite games, and putting them into one game. So, very excited for that game. Yeah. Well, I guess we'll end the stream here. I'm gonna start doing more streams as we get closer to the launch of my Kickstarter because I do want to talk about it more on my channel. I feel like I'm missing an opportunity to promote it because I haven't put out content in like 6 months. So I do want to do more, specifically live streams. I like talking to the chat. I think that's a lot of fun and getting ideas, like finding out about 7th Sea and the Leverage RPG that I know about. And Pendragon. Pendragon, I've heard of Pendragon, but um, don't know anything of how the mechanics are. But thank you guys for all the information. Now I have kind of homework for myself that I want to research some of these games. And thank you guys for hanging out. I hope to see you guys soon on the next stream. I'll announce it in the Discord as well as on my channel and the community page. Thank you guys again.